Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Brian. And I'm now for a sterling introduction. I'm just checking to make sure everything is all okay because obviously, like I said about Teams. So, hello everybody, and welcome to today's session. Microsoft Fabric and Azure DevOps stories so far. So, to manage expectations, there will be demos during this session. And let me just move this over so I can see the chat. Everything you see today is on a trial tenant, the same as what anybody else can sign themselves up for to create. There is no NDA material. And to be honest, I won't be covering a lot of the historic Power BI methods in this particular session. So ones relating to the older APIs, etc.
So, Kevin,
just
what about questions? Should I just interrupt you at the worst possible time, or do you want the questions later on?
I'll ask now and again if there's questions, and I will check in the chat as well.
Sure.
And I will check with you now and again as well. I'm quite flexible, everybody, so whatever works, to be honest. Anyway, agenda, obligatory bio, introduction to Microsoft Fabric, introduction to Azure DevOps, a bit about Git integration, and then recover. Well, actually, we will do deployment pipelines as well, and then we will cover data warehouses. So a bit about myself before we get started. My name is Kevin Chant. I'm a data engineering manager living in the Netherlands. However, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. However, I live in the Netherlands due to the fact my wife is Dutch. So I've worked in IT since the days of Windows 95, and that's as much as I'm going to say about that. Over that time, I've gained various certifications, also worked in various sectors as well. I'm a Microsoft dual category MVP, so basically I've got awards for both data platform and developer technologies. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. And you can find me online in a few different places. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky as at Kev Chant. I'm also on a Mastodon server somewhere as well. My LinkedIn profile has got a nice user-friendly URL. I have my own blog where I post a lot about data platform and developer technologies. Quite often the two together. And as of late, I've published quite a fair few Microsoft Fabric related posts, so you might want to look at those as well. And I have my own GitHub site where I share quite a few repositories that you can download, clone, and use as a template to perform CI/CD for various SQL Server services. And some other things as well, for example, Microsoft Fabric data warehouses. So let's jump straight into an introduction about Microsoft Fabric. I'm sure quite a few of you have seen a similar introduction by now, but just to recap. So this diagram represents Microsoft Fabric architecture. On the top right of the screen, you can see the 4 pillars which Microsoft Fabric is based on. So comprehensive analytics platform basically means that everything's available in one place. So all of these workloads you see here are all available if you go to one website. It's part of a software as a service offering. It's lake centric and open, so everybody can access all the data that's stored centrally in the same location, providing they got the right permissions, of course. And the idea is that all of these workloads can share the storage. It empowers every business user because they can start using Microsoft Fabric using tools that are familiar to them. And it's AI powered as well because there are multiple Copilot experiences being deployed throughout Microsoft Fabric, including more recent one being within notebooks. Now, a bit about OneLake before I cover all the different workloads. So OneLake is the unified storage solution within Microsoft Fabric. In reality, it's an abstraction layer on top of multiple Azure Data Lake storage accounts. However, you work solely within Microsoft Fabric using one lake, so you can avoid having to set up all the different authentication and network settings. And you get one lake per Microsoft Fabric tenant. And there's plenty of material online that covers even deeper details about one lake, including working with shortcuts, etc. Now, first of all, I want to cover it workload-wise, the data factory workload, and just have a bit of jargon here. Workloads are also known to some as experiences in Microsoft Fabric. So we hear the word experiences, it's the same thing effectively. The data factory workloads allows you to orchestrate the data movement within Microsoft Fabric. This can be done by using either data flows, or technically data flows Gen 2, or data, which is based on data flows Gen 2, based on Power Query, or data pipelines, which allows you to work with a canvas. Sorry about that, Brian.
Are you there, Kevin?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Great.
Okay?
Yeah, it just looked like you froze for a second, but it's fine.
That's fine. I noticed at this end as well.
Okay.
So anyway, sorry everyone. Back again. Data factory experience. Like I said, data flows Gen 2. Data pipelines, you can work with a canvas, the same as what you can do in Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipelines. Then you have data engineering experience, which allows you to work with the lakehouse paradigm at scale. And it's happened again, I've noticed.
Yeah, but it's
You there,
but
Brian?
I can see you, so it's fine.
Very strange. We'll keep going and hopefully things will resolve soon enough.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Just
and the screen is also shared, so it's fine.
That's fine. It's just I noticed a bit of flickering there as well, which is a bit worrying for a live session. Right, let's see what happens. Not quite sure what's happening this evening, everybody. The demo gods are definitely against our favor, but let's see. Anyway, data engineering experience, where it allows you to work with the lakehouse paradigm at scale. And it does this by allowing you to work with data in various different formats, and it's backed by Spark Compute, and you can run the code effectively by using notebooks. So it's similar to how you work with other products like Databricks or Synapse Spark Compute. Synapse Data Warehouse, on the other hand, allows you to use, I should say, T-SQL to work with large amounts of data at scale. So it's similar to other T-SQL related offerings from Microsoft in the past to work with data warehouses. So for example, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Synapse SQL Pools, and even PDW. And it comes with a nice data warehouse editor experience. Then we have Synapse Data Science, and in this workload, data scientists within your organization can collaborate with code to work on things like their models, etc. So they can share things like models and experience all within Microsoft Fabric environment, so all within one workspace if you want to. Now, there's some interesting things that come with the data science experience. For example, MO Flow is integrated into it. It also comes with the popular Synapse ML library. And the popular data wrangler feature, which a lot of people are starting to use a lot more now. Next, there is real-time analytics, and I think Brian may.
Now you froze again, Kevin. Are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Just when I was going to say something as well. What I'm going to do, bear with me a moment. Not quite sure. It seems to be on your particular one. So I've been using Teams quite well for a while here, but I'm just going to turn the webcam off. So anyway, I'm going to turn my webcam off for a moment. And all I was going to say was the real-time analytics experience, I do believe our host this evening knows a little bit about. So within the real-time analytics experience allows you to work with streaming data at scale. So just bear with me, everybody. I'm just checking a few things here, and all of a sudden everything appears to be improved. So I'm going to turn the webcam back on again and start to carry on. So anyway, this allows you to work with streaming data at scale, and you can ingest the data initially into a KQL database, which you can query using either KQL or SQL. And you can either retain the data solely in the KQL database, or you can export it into a lakehouse for further analytics. And some other interesting things you can do with it as well, including use as data activator. Then from there, Power BI to serve all your business intelligence needs. The reality is Microsoft Fabric's based on the Power BI architecture. And it's a similar experience as before, only not, because there have been a lot of optimizations and improvements. Finally, there's Data Activator, which allows you to alert based on incoming data. So one of the things I personally like about Microsoft Fabric is that in the past, like some of you, I had to implement environments similar to the one that you can see on your screen. So, and sort out and have some interesting security and network surprises along the way whilst implementing and putting all these together. Whereas the premise within Microsoft Fabric is that you can actually do it all within the same environment without and avoid a lot of friction, because you won't get as many, well, let's just say, surprises. Also, just wanted to quickly highlight one of the many AI capabilities that you get here. Now, Microsoft Fabric also includes some other auxiliary services, including Git integration, Purview integration, and further security features which are coming soon. And you can read about those on the official Microsoft Fabric release plan. So I will very quickly do a Fabric demo here, but obviously, as we've seen, I do have a bit of time to make up for the day. So let me just make this a bit shorter a minute. Let's go straight from the very start. So when you first go into Microsoft Fabric, and I'm left in here, you get this home screen by default, as you can see here. And in addition to that, you can configure various settings in the admin portal down here. So this is, of course, depending on if you've got the right permissions or not. Now, as you can see, once I've done that, things start to come to life on the left-hand side. Now, just to highlight one thing, you can easily switch between workloads in the bottom left-hand corner. And you can go through and then work with all the different workloads that I mentioned earlier. However, I will just quickly give you an example. So we'll just quickly go to one workspace, which is based on the Microsoft Learn material. And I will quickly open up a lakehouse just so you can see how a lakehouse looks. I won't go through and quickly demo all of the different workloads today. I will just quickly show you this one due to the fact that I will not really be doing any other demos based on this particular experience. Anyway, that's a very short Microsoft Fabric introduction, and there are a lot more detailed Fabric introductions online for anybody who's yet to see them. But I am going to cover Azure DevOps in a bit more detail. So, Azure DevOps manages your application lifecycle management, all the way from developing your initial work item to actually deploying the release. Now, there's two main versions of Azure DevOps. There's Azure DevOps Services, which is the cloud-based version. And then there's Azure DevOps Server, which is the version that you can install on a server effectively. Now, in the context of Microsoft Fabric, you only work with the Azure DevOps Services version for reasons that I will cover shortly. And in reality, Azure DevOps is actually a collection of services. And to highlight this, I'm going to do a demo of Azure DevOps for you now. So if I click on here, so this is the homepage that you go to when you first go into Azure DevOps, and I'll make this a bit bigger for everybody. The icon stroke button at the top represents your home portal. So you click on there, you go back to your home screen for Azure DevOps, and it's based on whichever account you're logged in as in Entra on that relevant tenant. Underneath there, you will see a list of organizations that your account's got access to. Now, these organizations can be a company you work for, or if you work for a large enterprise, it can be a division within the enterprise, or it could just be an organization you've created for testing purposes. Now, if you have the right permissions, you can see various settings at the organization level. And I will change the resolution to make it a bit more of an easy experience for you all here. So there's various general settings that you can change here. There are some interesting policies and permissions in place as well that you can change. And as you can see, you connect up to Microsoft Entra here. So there's policies and permissions you set. If you're looking to work with Azure boards, then you'll want to remember that you can change your processes in this particular section. For today's session, there are a couple of settings that I will highlight here, mostly due to the fact that I know a lot of people in the data platform community have been asking about this as of late. Microsoft have now introduced the capability to disable working with classic pipelines. This includes the classic editor, what used to be the original build process in Azure DevOps, so basically the GUI-based method, and of classic release pipelines as well, so effectively the releases feature. So if you're working with Azure DevOps and you can't see the ability to work with those, this is probably why, because there are some, let's say, disadvantages with working with deployment pipelines. And what I can actually do for you now, I will put in the chat one of my posts relating to this, because this comes up, I think, at least once a week by people, the question about why it's disappeared. So this is right. Anyway, and then there's various other pipeline settings as well. So for example, one that's quite relevant for some things I'll cover shortly is agent pools. So if you create pools in the organization settings, this will actually create pools that are available at the organization level. So any projects within the organization. Now, each organization contains one or more projects, like the one that you can see on the screen here. If I click on this particular project, you can see all the services I mentioned earlier on the left-hand side. So there's Azure Boards, to manage all your work items. Azure Repos, which is a visual representation of the Git repositories that it stores. I will be showing this a bit more shortly. Azure Pipelines, and this is where you manage your deployments, or some people would say your CI/CD requirements. Azure Test Plans, where you can work with test plans if you want to remove the need to work with spreadsheets. Just bear in mind that you can use all of the capabilities in Azure Test Plans if you have a Visual Studio Enterprise license. But if you need to purchase Azure DevOps and Test Plans licenses, the license cost goes up quite a lot. And then there's Azure Artifacts for long-term storage of artifacts within Azure DevOps. So that's one last thing. And providing you have the permissions, there's various settings you can change at the project level as well. Now, in the real world, out of organization settings and project settings are probably going to be the settings you have the most influence over. And again, there's various settings down here you may be of interest. Agent pools. So this will configure agent pools at the project level. And service connections as well. Bit of advice, if you are creating service connections in Azure DevOps, make sure you give them nice anonymized names. If you just go through the wizard and go click, 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 it will actually show things like subscription IDs in the names of your service connections, which you probably want to avoid. Right. Now that those two are out of the way, let's actually cover some CI/CD for Microsoft Fabric related content. So first I want to talk about Microsoft Fabric Git integration. Now, this allows you to synchronize supported items with a Git repository. Notice I say supported items. If you look for the details about Git integration, which I will put in the chat, you'll see that there's actually, well, let's just say a substantial list of items which are not supported still that some people are talking about. Now, Git integration at this moment in time only supports Azure DevOps repositories. However, Microsoft have publicly stated that they are looking to support other services in the future. However, at this moment in time, it's only Azure DevOps. And when I say Azure DevOps here, I mean Azure DevOps services, so the cloud-based version. And to use Git integration, you either require a Fabric or Power BI premium capacity. It says license there, but it actually means capacity. And a very popular question I get asked by people is that, yes, it can be any Fabric capacity. So you can use Git integration with any Fabric capacity, whether that's an F2 or an F2048, because you've got quite a lot of money you want to spend on Fabric. Exactly.
Do you know who buys that? It's like $270,000 a month or something.
I have seen interesting things on social media related to 2048. Whether they're true or not, I do not know. Okay. About people that have done things with them. But yes, so any Fabric capacity, F2 to F2048 are covered with Git integration. To be honest, if I bought an F2048 and couldn't work with Git integration, I would probably be a bit disappointed. So, in addition to Git integration, another innovation that has recently come along around the same time as Fabric has been Power BI projects. Officially on the website, they are called Power BI desktop projects. But either way, it has been a new innovation. So, Power BI projects are currently in preview, which is partially because there are some things that are being implemented, and I cover one of those shortly, which could change how you work with them. However, it is rather interesting as well because Power BI projects is actually part of the material that's covered for in the study guide for the DP600 exam. Now, Power BI projects allows you to store the metadata of your Power BI reports and semantic models in various files. Conceptually, it's a bit like database projects, and I know this raises a few eyebrows when I say this, but it's true. It basically stores various objects as metadata stroke code. And it can be used with Microsoft Fabric Git integration. And as I mentioned just now, Power BI projects are evolving and things get added to them over time. One of those things is TMDL support. Now, TMDL, also pronounced as TMDL, stands for Tabular Model Definition Language. And it's I say new-ish because it has been around for a while now, file format to replace the model.bim file that gets stored as part of your semantic model. And the reason that a lot of people perceive it to be new is because it is now supported in Power BI Desktop. However, you have been able to work with it a couple of different ways previously. For example, you can work with it in Tabular Editor. Another interesting point to highlight here is that you can upgrade your existing Power BI projects to use it. And the upgrade is very seamless process, if I'm honest with you. And I'll mention about it a bit more in a bit. And with all this in mind, I thought it's only fair I do a multiple workspaces demo alert based on this. And it also gives me a chance to highlight a few other things along the way. So, first things first, I have a report in Power BI Desktop. And if I go to File here and I go to Options and Settings and I click on Options, no need to strain your eyes, everybody, by the way. I will use CMIT for the more important parts in this session. If we go to Preview Features and I zoom in, you will see I've got two options enabled, which are Power BI Project Save option and Store Semantic Model using Tyndall format option. So what I can do is I'm just going to rename a page. You don't have to squint to see this. It's going to be very reasonably small change. I'll just zoom in so you can see I changed it to backup items. And I'm going to do a save. And because I've already saved this as a project, and I'll show you this before, I originally saved it as, I zoom into here, I saved it as a Power BI project files initially. Which means that if I go over now to that particular project in Visual Studio, it'll recognize a change. Now, before we go any further in this demo, one thing I do want to highlight. So before the Tyndall file format was enabled in Power BI Desktop, I actually used just a Power BI projects option, which meant that I had the model.bin file here, as you can see, in Visual Studio Code. So this is an older version of the project. However, I then copied the project and saved again, which is why now I have a definition subfolder instead. And as you can clearly see, the binmul file has disappeared. Instead, I get all these Tyndall files. And if I click on one and I move this over, you can see that the file is in a nice human readable format. So the idea, one of the ideas behind Tyndall is it's more human readable. And when I did this particular upgrade on this project, all I had to do is go to save, enable the option in Power BI desktop for Tyndall, clicked on save, and I had a nice little pop-up window asking if I want to save it. So this is the project I just saved just now in Power BI desktop. So I'm just going to say on here that I changed the page name. And I'm going to commit the change. Now, when I commit the change, that hardens the change to my local copy of the Git repository. And then Visual Studio Code very kindly invites me to synchronize the change. And when I click on synchronize the change, what it actually does, it synchronizes the change with a copy of the repository that I've got in Azure DevOps. And as you can see, because it was quite fast, it actually just synchronized the change there, and it shows I've just updated it. So if we go back in the Microsoft Fabric, you will see that this particular workspace says there's a change, and it says there's a change because this particular workspace has been set up for Git integration to the development branch, which is the same branch that I updated here in Azure DevOps. So it recognizes a change. So if I click on source control, I can update the change. Once that's done, I can click on the report. And as you can see, I have the new page name there. Now, I do have another workspace set up. So this particular workspace represents a development workspace. I also have a production workspace here as well. And if I click on this report, it still shows the old page name. And that is because this production workspace uses the same Git repository, but it uses a different branch. Someone's noting that the savers Timble is irreversible as of present. That is correct. My recommendation is to do like I just showed you I did. Make a copy of your repository first, have another clone of the repository as well, and then make the change from there. So you still keep your older copy using your older file format, just in case. Anyway, back to this, as I said, is using a different branch. So what we can do now in Azure DevOps is create what's known as a pull request. So a pull request is just a nice way of me saying, asking to merge the contents of one branch into another. So I'm going to create a new pull request from the development branch that we just updated into main. And as you can see, it already recognizes the commit I did earlier. So in the real world, you just fill all this out nicely. For the benefit of this demo, I'm just going to click on create. As you can see, whilst after I've done that, it actually starts doing a check. How is it running a check? Well, if I click on branches and I click on my main branch and go to branch policies, you will see I've got something called build validation enabled, and it's pointing to a pipeline. So if I click on my pipelines now, you will see this particular pipeline is running. I click on this particular pipeline and click on edit. Be warned, if you've not seen YAML before, I do apologize. I don't want to scare anybody off with too much code. But this is the type of pipeline that's recommended by Microsoft for doing this. So I wanted to stick with this. So if you look yourself, you can see how to work with it. So what this pipeline actually is doing at this moment in time, it's downloading Tabular Editor and the default rules for the best practices analyzer and Tabular Editor onto the Azure pipelines agent behind the scenes, which does all the processing of your pipelines. It's then running those dataset rules. So it's effectively running Tabular Editor through the CLI on the Azure pipelines agent to check that the semantic model is okay and sticks within the rules. Afterwards, it's going to download PBIX Inspector. And then on a similar kind of concept of what I was doing with Tabular Editor, it's going to run that against the report and check that the report meets certain requirements. So all of that runs behind the scenes, so you can set it all up. So when you run a pull request like I did, it will run that check every single time. And then that way, if there is an issue with the pipeline or an issue with the semantic model that causes a serious issue, it won't allow you to complete the pull request. And just to show that the pipeline really works, as you can see, it's amber and not fully green. And I do this deliberately to highlight the fact that you should always check for not failures, but warnings and errors. As you can see, I've already ensured that it violates a couple of rules, just to highlight that it's really running behind the scenes. However, it's only warning, so it's not serious enough to fail the continuous integration check. So once that's done, I can approve it and then go to complete. Now, if you are going to use this setup with multiple workspaces using different branches in the same repository, one thing I want to highlight, make sure you don't delete the branch that's being used after merging. As you can see, I've set it up here not to do so, but it's very important that you don't, otherwise you may end up breaking your Git integration. So it's doing the merge now. And once it has completed, if I click on refresh on here now, as you can see, it's now recognized the change. I can click on update all. This will then update the items in my Fabric workspace that represents production. And now when I click on the report, you can see it's now got the new name. So in this demo, not only have I shown you how you can use the new typical file format with your Power BI projects, but I've also showed you how you can use Git integration with multiple workspaces. And I will put a couple of links about this in the chat. So I'm just checking to make sure there is no other links. Nope, so that's fine. So like I said, this is what I've just shown you. So using them together. And as you saw, I did take it one step further by introducing this CI check as well. Now, there is one other thing I want to highlight here. So at this moment in time, direct lake semantic models are not natively supported by Git integration. So if you create your own semantic model in Microsoft Fabric that uses direct lake mode and that workspace is set up for Git integration, as you can see here, it is unsupported by default. However, you can get them to work with Git integration by extracting the model using Tabular Editor beforehand, and there is a bit of a lengthy process to do this. And I have actually done a blog post relating to how you can start testing this yourself manually.
Have you figured out, Kevin? Have you figured out how to, if it is possible to do this automatically?
Yes, I have. I haven't got a blog post for it yet. Thank you for the spoiler for everyone, Brian. So this is how you can do it manually. Brian has just given you all a little bit of a spoiler alert of what to expect in the future, apparently.
I didn't know that,
yes.
sorry.
It's fine. I think, to be honest, I think you can assume that if somebody's figured out how to do it manually, then over time they'll put some automation in there. So this is one way that you can do it, through file manipulation, and you can get it then to work with your Git integration as well. Hopefully over time it will become supported by Git integration natively. What I can actually show you right now, before we go any further relating to this, I can actually quickly show you how you can do it. So this is Tabular Editor. This is a direct leg semantic model that I've connected to directly, and this is within a Fabric workspace. Again, do not screw in, I've got Zoom it. So here I can go to tools and select preferences. This is Tabular Editor 3, by the way. So what I've done in file formats, I have hardened it to work with the compatibility level 1604, which is the one for direct leg semantic models. And then from there, I can just click on File, select Save the folder, and that will save the Tyndall for the semantic model into a folder. If you read my blog post, obviously, if you want to use it with Git integration, there's a bit more work you have to do. I'm not going to do that entire demo because that will consume the rest of the session. In addition to that, you can use deployment pipelines. Now, the reality is deployment pipelines have been around for some time now. They were available in Power BI for quite some time, and I'm sure those of you who've worked with Power BI, even if you just take the PL300 exam, will realize that. However, one interesting thing I will note here is that you can use Git integration with deployment pipelines as well. And I'll very quickly give you a demo of this now. So if we go back in Azure DevOps, for example, I go to Tyndall pipeline. Of course, I'm doing a live demo, it's going to be slow. This is just a basic example of a deployment pipeline. You can extend your stages now, by the way, but if you want to add custom stages, you have to do that when you first create your deployment pipeline. As you can see, this particular deployment pipeline, and I'll make sure that we can see all this clearly here, uses the same development workspace that I had configured for Git integration. So if you want to, you can just use that particular workspace, or you can have another intermediate workspace beforehand that uses Git integration. And then from there, do Git integration into your development workspace, and then use deployment pipelines for the other stages. So for the benefit of anybody who's new to deployment, you can click on deploy, you can cherry pick which objects you want to deploy to a different stage if you want to. You can also set up what's known as deployment rules depending on your sources. So for example here, it's grayed out because only certain types of sources are supported. But say for example, if it's an Azure SQL database, you can change it to another Azure SQL database here. You could also put in parameter rules. One interesting thing to note about data source types, you can only change the data source for the same type. So for example, change from an Azure SQL database to another. You can't change data source type. So for example, if you've got Azure SQL database, you can't suddenly change it to be a dedicated SQL pool. It has to be the same type. So I just want to state that for everybody here as well. But like I said, a common paradigm that's been advertised now is to use Git integration and deployment pipelines together. Of course, you may just want to work with Git integration, or you may just want to work with deployment pipelines. In addition to all of that, it's worth noting that recently APIs have been made available for both Git integration and deployment pipelines within Microsoft Fabric now for use as well. So you may want to experiment with those as well. So finally, well, not finally, but next I want to cover working with the Synapse Data Warehouse workloads within Microsoft Fabric. As I mentioned earlier, this is a data warehousing solution within Microsoft Fabric. And at least at this moment in time, it's not supported by Git integration, or, well, it's not supported by Git integration, and you cannot work with it in data warehouses fully with deployment pipelines, even though it says so in some documentation. However, data warehouses do support being used as database projects, and you can do this in Azure Data Studio. So effectively, you can treat data warehouses very similar to how you treat CI/CD for SQL Server databases. And because you can work with database projects, you can actually deploy them to other data warehouses in an Azure DevOps pipeline. And I can show this for you now. So I'm in Azure Data Studio, but before we do that, I actually want to show you the same warehouse in Microsoft Fabric. So I have a very basic warehouse set up in Microsoft Fabric, and it's got these 4 tables in there. Now, if I click on settings up here, which I'm not going to do during a recorded session, it will give me the connection string to use to connect up to my data warehouse, which means that I can connect up using any application that supports connecting via a SQL endpoint. In our particular case for this demo, it's going to be Azure Data Studio, but it could be SQL Server Management Studio as well as some other tooling. So if I expand here, you can see the 4 tables I showed you just now in Microsoft Fabric. Now, one interesting thing to note here, you can't view in Azure Data Studio at this moment in time in Fabric the stored procedures. However, they do exist and they will port with projects, and you can still view them in SQL Server Management Studio. I know a couple of people have asked me about this a while ago, so I thought I'd better highlight that here. Now, in Azure Data Studio, I have an extension installed called SQL Database Projects. And because I have this particular extension installed, it gives me some interesting possibilities in Azure Data Studio. So here, for example, I can right click and select Create Project from Database. That will give me this nice wizard to fill out, which then I can fill out all the details here and click on Create. That will create a database project locally for me inside the folder I specify. I have already done this, and this is how a database project based on a Fabric data warehouse looks. And if I click on one of these, as you can see, it's just the schema of your tables. And then once you've got a database project, you can go to source control in Azure Data Studio. And if it's not already a Git repository, it will ask you to, if you want to initialize it as a repository. As you can see, I've already done so. And then you can do things like add a remote to synchronize it with Azure DevOps. Which I happen to fortunately have already done. So if I make this a bit smaller again, so we can navigate a bit easier here. So this is the same database project in Azure DevOps, which means that I can now create a DAP pack, the same as you would do for SQL Server related databases, and then deploy them. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this in Azure DevOps, and I did discuss one earlier. So this is doing it using the classic build pipeline, also known as the classic editor. And I thought I'd show this first, just to highlight to everybody what actually happens when you build a DAP pack. So first, you need to install the latest version of SQL package on the Azure Pipeline agent. So basically, as I mentioned earlier, when you work with pipelines in Azure DevOps, it doesn't do the work itself. It sends all the work to servers behind the scenes known as agents. In this particular one, we're installing SQL package. We're then creating a DAP pack based on the contents of the database project. And then we're publishing it into Azure DevOps. So if we go back to this particular pipeline again, and click on one completed earlier, you should see a created artifact here. Bear with me, everybody. I'll make sure I click on the right one here. So basically, once that is completed, you will effectively have a DAP pack file created. And once that DAP pack file has been created, I pass the example for now because I've just noticed the time. You can then deploy it using a release. And if I click on the release, and again, this is another GUI-based way of doing it. Basically, what you first do is set up the artifact to be the latest artifact that it can find for that particular pipeline, which you can see here, and then deploy it to run on more stages. So in this particular stage, it downloads the artifacts, basically it's downloading the DAP pack file, and then it's deploying it to another Fabric data warehouse, as you can see here. Now, that's using classic pipelines. Person's showing their mind being blown. Not to worry. I've got blog posts to help, strangely enough. Yeah. So, in addition to using the classic pipelines, you can also do this using YAML. Now, one of the many advantages of a YAML pipeline is that it's more portable than the classic pipelines, which means that you can actually share these easier with everybody else. But this YAML pipeline, you don't have to focus too much, but if I scroll down, it's basically doing the same as what I just showed you in the other two pipelines. So first, I'm building the DAP pack. I'll make this a bit bigger in case anyone wants to read some of the YAML. So like it showed in the classic editor just now, we are building the DAP pack file based on the contents of the database project. And then we're deploying it to another Fabric data warehouse. Now, as I kind of joked just now and Brian laughed about, and I will include another link as well with this. So I do have some blog posts relating to this, and I will put one of them into the chat. So this particular post shows you how to do it using the classic pipelines. If you click on the next post after that one, it actually shows you how to do YAML pipelines as well. Not only that, but the other blog posts afterwards will have a link to the GitHub repository, which I share, which you can download and use as a template to do this. So basically, this YAML file is available in GitHub for you to download and use yourself to set all of this up. So you don't have to worry about figuring out everything I just showed you. Like I said, one of the advantages of YAML pipelines, very portable and allows you to easily share with others. So one interesting thing I do want to note about all of this is that you can use this to deploy updates to a data warehouse. And if I go back to Azure Data Studio, I can actually show you. So there's no smoke and mirrors here. I've got another Fabric data warehouse, and if I click on tables, you'll see I've already deployed the tables, the schema for them into another data warehouse. Interesting point though, SQL package had an update last year to cater for this. However, at this moment in time, author table is not supported. So you can do this one time for table updates. If you're just relying on the future updates to Fuse, and that's fine, you can keep using the same pipeline. However, if you want to do this because you suspect you'll want to change the schema for tables, you will have to wait for a later SQL package update. So I know it's a lot for everybody to take in. That is it for this particular session, and there are a couple of links that I will put into the chat as well, which is why I'm looking in the other direction. So I'm just putting in a couple of additional links relating to one is a way that I figured out how to speed up the continuous integration checks by introducing something known as parallelism, in other words, using multiple Azure pipeline agents. Also an introduction of deployment pipelines. I also feel, and even though this is recorded, I will apologize to everybody for the technical issues at the start of this session. Not quite sure what happened there. It seems to be a common trend, but that is it. So are there any questions from anybody? And I'm just going down from here. Questions relating to the video. If you have
any questions, please write them in the chat, and Kevin can answer them. I saw a few overall questions about the video, when it will be shared and where. The video will be shared and uploaded to YouTube, and it will be announced on the Fabric user group LinkedIn page. You can find it here, and yeah, within when I have the time, because the next 3 weeks will be a heavy traveling thing for all of us. So. Any questions, then please write them in the chat, or else I would like to say thank you to Kevin once again for being a presenter at the user group.
So there is one question that's just appeared in the chat.
There's one from Bjarne here. Would it be possible to deploy a tabular model like a DAG pack using the XMLA endpoint?
That is a very interesting question. You can indeed, using certain tools, not like a DAG pack per se, but you can deploy updates to your semantic models using, for example, tabular editors. So you are able to deploy changes directly using the XMLA endpoint, providing that you've got it set to read write. So yes, if you've got XML endpoint set to read write, there is certainly possibilities for doing similar things, but you can deploy updates to your semantic models that way. So yes, is the short answer there. And of course, you can connect that to the XML endpoint to do other things as well, just like creating custom measures, etc. And the second one, is it possible to deploy Fabric configuration with infrastructure as code? And I can give a typical answer here as someone who's been a SQL DBA in the past. It depends what you want to do. There are certain elements that you can work with and change using infrastructure as code. There's REST APIs to help. There's PowerShell commandlets that you can use as well. It depends on what particular setting. If you go into the Microsoft Fabric documentation, you can look and see which PowerShell modules and which APIs you can use. Next question, migration from Synapse to Fabric using Spark jobs, any clue as to when it will be possible? Currently, it seems to be only supported for some components. That is a very good question. And it depends what elements of Synapse do you mean from data? Do you mean, for example, the files that are actually being stored by Spark Compute? Or do you mean, for example, from SQL pools? If you can just put that into the chat, that would help out quite a lot.
Oh, pipelines, data flows, etc.
So there's a GitHub. Oh, somebody's already put a link into the GitHub repository. Thank you very much for doing that. Finding a hard time finding documentation on the new Fabric API endpoints. Do you know where to find them? And the best place to find them is to go onto the Fabric announcements where they've announced about these endpoints being available and follow the links from there. Is the very short answer for you.
There is actually, Jesper has just commented that it is around pipelines and data flows to migrate from Synapse to Fabric.
Oh, so the pipelines and the managed data flows.
Yeah.
There is actually, to help with this situation, because obviously it's not fully available yet, there is a GitHub repository available created by somebody to help with some of the migration of these objects. Strange enough, I think I have to link in one of my blog posts. I would have to look after the fact, or Brian may be able to quickly look if you ask him nicely. I did have a blog post that says Microsoft Fabric Git repositories currently available, or something along those lines. And what I can actually do is stop sharing, and then I can help find it quicker as well. So that means I can do this again quickly now. So let's see if I can find it quickly as well. I think somebody did put some migration repositories in there, so.
There is a serverless pool, serverless wings. GitHub, no, yeah. Well, while we search for that, there is actually a small.
I found the whole blog post. There is a link in here, and this helps. It converts. Well, allegedly helps convert mapping data flow to Microsoft Fabric. There's a link to it in this blog post I wrote, so feel free to follow that.
Okay, great. There's a question from Admir. Sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. GitHub repo with AZDO pipeline. What is that? Azure, I don't know.
That's the Azure DevOps pipeline. So somebody asked if there was a link, and somebody very kindly straight afterwards actually shared the link to my GitHub repository that's got it in there.
Okay, got it.
So that's already been answered.
Check. Great questions. Any more questions? Just please write them in the chat before we end the session. And if you don't have any more questions, I would like to use the time to just make a very, very quick roundup of the next 3 sessions we have in the user group. You can find them here. March 10 on this upcoming Sunday. The links will be posted. Yeah, I will copy all the links to the meetup events, Harry, so you can find them there. This Sunday we will talk about bots and AI and API calls. And in April we have write back to the data warehouse in Fabric with Power BI, and we also have Git source control in Power BI and Fabric. So more source control and more write back, very exciting topics there. And if we have any last questions before we leave or round this up, I would like to say thank you, Kevin, once again for presenting at this user group. Kevin Chant University, exactly. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for all the attendees. Thank you for attending. And
that's a funny comment for multiple reasons. I'm not sure if the same person is aware that my employer has a fabric university.
Oh, now it's just called Kevin Chant University, so you have a name change there.
Apparently so.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. And here in Denmark, it is 8:10. So I would like to wish everyone a great evening and hopefully a great weekend when you end tomorrow. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.